What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Jimmy Mullen podcast. Today, my friends, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on two of the more recent Disney Plus projects to come out from Marvel Studios, the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe. We have She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, the newest full-fledged series to come out from Marvel, along with a special presentation, their first TV special, their first Halloween special, Werewolf by Night. I would have talked about She-Hulk in the previous episode, as well as Werewolf by Night. However, I realized that there was a lot that I wanted to talk about with She-Hulk, and the episode was already a little long as is with all the news topics I was discussing, along with my thoughts on new music and things like that. And I also had not seen Werewolf by Night yet, even though it had been out. But I have since watched it. So I'm going to be giving my thoughts on that as well as She-Hulk in this episode. Unfortunately, I don't have any She-Hulk merchandise or Werewolf by Night merchandise, so I included characters that were featured in the She-Hulk series. I have a bunch of stuff here. Of course, if you watch the video version of this on YouTube, you get a bit of a bonus, I guess. I've got my Disney Infinity Hulk, along with a Superhero Squad Burger King toy from like 2009 or something. It's like a keychain thing, but you also like push this button and Hulk's arms move up and down and things like that. I think the button's stuck on mine. I have to like push it and then, I don't know. It's a bit of an old toy, but I found that in a bin when I was preparing for this. Also, the Avengers Endgame McDonald's Happy Meal Hulk, along with this McDonald's Hulk from like, I don't know, probably around 2010, 2011, probably something like that. He's like pushing his fists together with like a little lever on the back. And then these little minifigures of Daredevil and Abomination that my brother had when he was little that I held on to. So, that's that. I figured I'd just talk about those for a second. As for She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, She-Hulk is a character that I was not very familiar with at all going in. Like, I knew who She-Hulk was. I knew it was a relative of the Hulk, and she's a lawyer, and that was all I knew. I also knew about like the fourth wall stuff, kind of like with what they got going on with Deadpool. So, I kind of had a feeling of what I was getting into. And I also knew that the show was going to be a bit more comedy focused and like kind of like tropes focused rather than, like a full on action show like we've gotten from other projects previously in the last year and a half, nearly 2 years or so, with Marvel Studios on Disney Plus. And overall, I'll just say I think it's probably the most unique show that Marvel has put out thus far, along with tons of self-awareness thrown in there. It's very meta, which I thought was really interesting. It's got this episodic base that makes hints to a bigger story throughout, with cases being solved by the end of each episode, and then it kind of has this big lead up. They have this like story kind of being hinted at throughout each episode, and then there's this big payoff at the end. We'll get to that though. I say the way they went with it. The way they decided to go, I thought was pretty interesting, to say the least. So, episode 1, we start out with Bruce Banner revealing that he's developed a device made for him that will keep him in human form, basically an inhibitor, because we saw him during the post-credit scene for Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and before that, we had last seen him in Endgame, where he was in a cast, still in Hulk form, in a suit and everything for Tony Stark's funeral. But in Shang-Chi, he was in human form, and he had this big thing on his arm, and everyone's like, what's that about? It turns out it's an inhibitor that keeps him in human form, because obviously he can't go everywhere in Hulk form. If he wants to fit in a car or something like that, he's going to have to go back to Bruce. So, there's going to be some, ways that, he's going to have to do that. So, obviously, he can't be Hulk all the time. But I guess for the most part, he stays as Hulk because obviously, he doesn't want to have to wear that inhibitor constantly. And you know what? He made that deal with Hulk. They were just like, live and let live. Put the brains and the brawn together and just go like that casually. So I guess he does that for the most part. But basically, him and Jen, they're going on this drive, and Bruce, starts explaining to Jen that, he has this inhibitor, and then a Sakaar ship just kind of comes in out of nowhere and scares the crap out of them. So the car swerves, they crash, and Hulk's blood accidentally gets on Jen and infuses with her blood, and she becomes She-Hulk. And the introduction of the show leads into this origin story, and it's her breaking the fourth wall and telling this story. So she runs away and then wakes up at Hulk's safe house, which is in Mexico, and has a lot of Easter eggs throughout it, such as the Ravager Hulk helmet that he had on Sakaar, along with some Tony Stark stuff thrown in, and things like that. Hulk explains that she wasn't killed by the exposure due to the Banner family having this special gene that gives them stronger abilities when they have access to gamma radiation, when they're intertwined with gamma radiation. So any other human, it probably would have killed them with the amount of blood that was given. But she powered through it, and now she has Hulk powers as a result. He puts her in a chamber, puts a bunch of saws towards her to kind of test the waters with, how much this Hulk power has on her compared to him, because, it wasn't very easy for him for a long time. They were two different personalities fighting with each other. But it turned out that pretty much from the beginning, she had full control of all of this. She was able to turn into She-Hulk and still have the same personality and all sorts of stuff like that. Just her physical form changed. And Hulk also says bruh during this, which I thought was interesting. And then, there's more stuff that goes on. There's a bit of training and all that. He starts to teach her the ropes of how to be a Hulk and things like that. There's also a little tiki bar that Bruce and Tony built together, and they also carved their initials, and Bruce talks about how during the blip they put that whole thing together. Bruce goes on to talk about how Tony and him built this tiki bar and did, basically set up this whole safe house for Bruce that he could, hide away in and do his research. During the blip, the 5 years of time that went by after Thanos snapped his fingers and they were left still standing. So, they kind of had to do what they had to do. And then, of course, we have the events of Endgame 5 years later. Jen basically says to Bruce that she doesn't really have interest in being a superhero, despite him warning that, yes, while, you can continue to be a lawyer, you're going to have to, deal with the fact that you are a Hulk, and, there are consequences to that. It's very dangerous. People could come after you, things like that. And she's like, I'm just going to be a lawyer. I don't want this. She rejects it. And then, they have a fight. Hulk does the thunderclap, which we haven't seen since the 2008 movie. And then she does it so many times over. And then there's that little clip of her obliterating him. And that's been memed to death already. We cut back to the court where she's in the middle of a case. And then Titania, her arch nemesis from the comics, but is now a superhero influencer. I'd also never heard of this character beforehand, so I didn't really know what to expect, but I did think this was kind of cringy. But she bursts in, and then they have a fight. Apparently, in the original cut, she was supposed to get punched in the vag, but they cut it because they were like, oh, okay, maybe that's a little too risque since this is Disney Plus. And of course people were pretty mad about that. Come on, bro, just let it slide. But I guess Disney wasn't having it. There's also a post-credit scene back at the tiki bar, where Jen and the Hulk are having a talk, and she's trying to ask him, a question that she asked in the beginning, whether or not Steve Rogers was a virgin, and Bruce reveals that he lost his virginity to a girl he met on tour when he was Captain America, when he was serving. And there is a girl that he encounters in that movie that he's probably alluding to, and it ends with her going, yeah, Captain America fucked. But it cuts, when she's about to say the word. So, yeah, that's episode 1. I thought it was a pretty good introduction to the show. Overall, I thought, okay, this could be interesting. I'd like to see where they go next. Also, keep in mind, I did not mention this when I started for some reason, but I actually did not watch the show right away when it came out, as I was on vacation in North Carolina, and I wanted to wait till I was home to start watching the series. So I actually watched the first 3 episodes back to back to back, and then from then on, I watched them every week. So episode 2, I got right into. Uh, she becomes a liability for her firm because she turned into She-Hulk in the middle of the court and fought Titania. So she gets fired from her position that she had. There's lots of Easter eggs on a computer monitor where they're trying to look up information. There's a pair of shoes called Iron Man 3s, which look pretty sick, and they also show this more and more in another episode of the series. There's newspaper headlines such as a celestial statue that's risen out of the ground. That happens in Eternals, and it still hasn't really been addressed other than this. So this was like a first time thing, like outside of the Eternals, like addressing the fact that there is a giant statue in the middle of the ocean, because there hasn't really been much discussion on that. So I guess they're finally addressing it. Also, the most interesting headline was that there was a brawl that took place at a bar where a guy had claws on his fists. Of course, definitely referring to Wolverine. So I guess they're starting to tease Wolverine. Whether or not this is Hugh Jackman in Deadpool 3, we don't know yet. But yeah, it is hinting towards a possible Wolverine appearance at some point on Disney Plus or in a movie or something. So that's pretty exciting. We meet Jen's family. We go to her family's house, and her dad asks about Hawkeye's arrows. It's like a little funny gag, like, what happens to all those arrows? Does he, go back and pick them up? I thought it was just, a funny little thing. She ends up getting hired. She goes to a bar and gets hired by someone from GLK&H, which was her direct competitor when she was at the other law division, but she's now working for GLK&H. The only catch is that they want her to be She-Hulk at work. They want her to be the face of the company and all that. So she, regretfully, she's like, oh, I don't want to do this. But she ends up going for it because you're like, hey, it's a job. Maybe this could be really cool. They actually specialize in superhero cases and people with superpowers. So Emil Blonsky is her first case on this new job. Now, Emil Blonsky, of course, is the Abomination, who was a villain in 2008's The Incredible Hulk that stars the other guy who played the Hulk in the MCU, Edward Norton. He comes back, he's the first case, and, she says, hey, maybe there's a bit of a conflict of interest. He tried to kill my cousin, and they were like, yeah, no, we really need you to represent him. We believe you're the perfect person for it. So she goes to the Department of Damage Control cell where he's being held, this maximum security thing. He's in this giant pod thing, and an alarm will go off if he uses his powers or something. And his case of wanting to get out is honestly reasonable, as he, makes the case that he was given the super soldier serum or a variant of it that had bad effects on him. It was that's basically what happened with Hulk. The gamma radiation was a possible way to recreate the super soldier serum, which failed and then made him into a giant green monster. So, same thing happened to Abomination. And while Hulk gets, all this praise by society, he gets locked up in a maximum security prison for all these years. And the Hulk has done so much more damage since, and he gets no repercussions. What's the deal with that? So basically, She-Hulk has to pretty much defend him and say hey, he's turned over a new leaf. He's a good guy now. He, he's at peace with himself and all this other stuff. So it turns out that him and the Hulk no longer have beef. He says this to Jen on the phone while he's on his way to Sakaar, actually. as he found out about the message, which I'll talk about that in a second. But he makes a joke saying, like, I'm a completely different person from back then. Of course, making an obvious joke at the fact that Edward Norton was the one that played the Hulk in the first movie, and the Avengers and everything after, he was recasted to Mark Ruffalo. So they kind of have a little bit of a nod to that in here, which I thought was great. And it turns out he is on a ship going to Sakaar to figure out what message was trying to be sent to him, because it turns out there was no actual person in that ship. You know, they kind of just tracked his location, and they were just trying to get the message to him. But of course, the ship flies right in front of their car, and Jen's driving. She's gonna freak the fuck out, and then of course we have the events of She-Hulk. So yeah, there's this little bit of teasing. We don't really know what the deal is yet. Of course, fans at the time were like, okay, it's gonna lead to this, and of course they were right, but we'll talk about that. And the episode ends with a tie-in to Shang-Chi, where the Abomination was released from his cell by Wong to compete in a cage match. And then we lead into episode 3. This was easily the wackiest episode by far, and probably still is, in my opinion. I did not like this one as much, but it was interesting enough, I guess. This one took the silly factor way up. Wong gets introduced. They bring up his LinkedIn profile or whatever it was. I can't remember. Turns out he worked at Target for 9 years, which I guess is an interesting fact that we probably wouldn't have known otherwise. There's a joke about cameos and expectation with that, with Jen breaking the fourth wall and addressing like, oh, I know you guys are excited to see Wong. And saying that I thought was pretty genius. The montage of social media reaction to She-Hulk starts, making waves, because now she's made public appearances. There's lots of misogyny, as there is a portion of fans, unfortunately, out there that scream woke and MCU. These people suck. Like they're just too, set in their ways, and they have a very bubbled view on the world. And they really represent that with this show, like, with a group of people that don't like She-Hulk. And I think they nail it, honestly. But we'll get to that, when we get there. But I figured I'd just throw that out there. Turns out Wong brought out Abomination so that he could train to be the Sorcerer Supreme. As Doctor Strange had been snapped away by Thanos, Wong got Sorcerer Supreme due to a technicality, as was explained in Spider-Man No Way Home. But of course, in that time, as the Sorcerer Supreme, he wants to become stronger. He doesn't, feel that he's, either he doesn't feel that he's worthy, or that, he just wants to become stronger. So he has the Abomination be his training partner, his sparring partner. So they go to a cage match, and then we see that take place in Shang-Chi. So now it's, now the projects are interconnecting with each other. Pug, who is one of the side characters in the show, he works in GLK&H alongside Jennifer Walters. He works with a guy who claims he was catfished by someone pretending to be Megan Thee Stallion. Megan Thee Stallion, of course, being a mainstream hip-hop artist that is currently in pop culture. So, a real artist being name dropped in the show, and also making an appearance, but we'll talk about that. So, this guy claims that he was catfished. Turns out it was a shape-shifting Asgardian elf pretending to be Megan Thee Stallion, and he wants to sue because he lost a ton of money because he thought he was giving money to Megan Thee Stallion. And now he wants his money back. So then the Asgardian elf, turns out she was inside of GLK&H, and then she turns into Pug and starts saying a bunch of really horrible things as him, basically saying things like, he loves harassing women in the workplace, and then Pug then comes out. He's like, guys, I don't. You guys know me. Like it's clearly obvious that there's two of him in the room. So, people understand that, but it's like, wow, like that's, I don't know. I thought that delivery was pretty funny. And then we get to the court part, and honestly, it was kind of cringe. The judge gets impersonated by the elf, which, in the real world, that would pretty much throw out all of their credibility. And, there would be no case then. It would just be like a joke at that point. I don't know. It was just kind of like, they were throwing all these jokes around, and, it didn't feel like a legitimate court case. It kind of felt a little too comical, things that didn't really make sense. I don't know. That whole part of the episode was stupid anyway, but then the parole hearing for Blonsky begins. Turns out he has 7 wives, and they came to watch the parole hearing. They're all wearing these matching outfits and all that. It's a little silly. It's a little silly. I was kind of like, this is weird. I don't know what I'm watching here. Wong doesn't face any criminal charges, actually, for releasing Emil. Which, like, if you're going to set up all this, you might as well go all the way out. But, like, it kind of begs the question, like, why is Wong exempt? Is it because he's the Sorcerer Supreme? When you start bringing, like, law into it and also applying real-world things at the same time, it's kind of like, how can you let this person get away with that if you're saying these things? I don't know. It kind of begs the question with things like that, but I'm not really going to get into that. I just figured I'd throw that little bit out there. She-Hulk then at night is approached by the Wrecking Crew, inspired by, and not the same as the team from the comics. They're just like 4 of these dudes with some magic or some kind of super-powered weapons or something, and they try to extract blood from She-Hulk, but she fends them off. She pretty much humiliates them, Megan the Stallion then comes up at the end, and then there's a twerking part of the episode, which definitely exists. Yeah, I mean, considering everything that's already come from Marvel Studios, this was like the least expected thing that could have been put out by them. But at the same time, it's like, wow, like they're really, really throwing us for surprises. Like, there's just tons of that all throughout here. And it's going in ways that I wasn't sure it was going to, or that I didn't expect. And that was certainly one of them. In episode 4, Donnie Blaze is a magician that doesn't have real magic on the surface, but it turns out he has a ring that lets him open portals similar to magic users like Doctor Strange and Wong. And he puts the lives of his volunteers in danger for the entertainment of his audience. And then there's this girl, Madison, with a Y and 2 N's, but the Y isn't where you think it is. She was probably the best part of this entire episode, I'm going to be honest. Wong would rather set a legal precedent, though, about this because it comes to his attention. And he tries to sue Donnie Blaze for using, sorcery pretty much illegally, I guess. Then there's a B plot where She-Hulk decides to go date hunting because, she's lonely, she's single, she doesn't have a man in her life, and she wants to kind of spice things up a little bit. So she goes on a couple dates as herself, and no one really cares. No one's really attracted to Jennifer Walters. So then she decides, you know what? Let me test the waters. Let me see if She-Hulk gets the attention of these boys. So she ends up going on dates with a bunch of guys, specifically one of them, this guy Todd. He's a little bit of a weirdo. He starts asking a lot of questions like, how does your skin work? Can it be pierced? And, asking things, can vibranium do it? And all sorts of things like that. Calling her a specimen. Just being a real creep. We cut back to Donnie Blaze doing a magic act. And then he accidentally opens a portal. And then a bunch of demon creatures start flying out of it. It's pretty crazy. So they take care of that. He can't use magic anymore. And then She-Hulk goes on a date with this guy who's like really attracted to She-Hulk. But then turns out he doesn't really like Jen. He's only interested in She-Hulk, so he leaves. By the time this episode ends, I was saying that this was the best episode by far, And I think that continued to be the case for a little while. But of course, later episodes were a bit better, specifically episode 8, but we'll get to that when we get there. Episode 5, Titania decides that she's going to sue She-Hulk because She-Hulk is using the name She-Hulk, and Titania has now released products using the She-Hulk name and got the trademark pretty much before She-Hulk could, and is now suing her and profiting off the name She-Hulk, making these cosmetic products and things like that. She-Hulk has pretty much hated the name that the world pretty much decided to give her, but then she decides, maybe there's a bit of an upside to this. I kind of like the sound of it, but she doesn't really go publicly by She-Hulk. She kind of corrects people by calling herself Jennifer Walters when people call her She-Hulk when she's being interviewed and things like that. Jill and Pug, on a side mission, they go finding knockoff Avengers merchandise to kind of, use this as like a leeway to be like, oh, so who really owns the trademarks, for these heroes? How does that even work? Because there are things like Iron Man merchandise, and there's an Ant-Man backpack in the Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania trailer by, the little kid has an Ant-Man backpack. So, there's that and things like that, and there's little nods. They go looking for fake Avengers merch and they find things that are misspelled, they have the Avengers and the Avengers, and people are saying, Marvel's probably going to trademark those now so that way they can stop all these bootlegs and things like that. We end up meeting the designer of suits for street-level superheroes in the California area. His name is Luke Jacobson, and She-Hulk goes to him for a request that she has a couple business suits made, because in every episode up until now, she's been wearing business suits as She-Hulk, and she looks all blocky and awkward. So if Luke decides to make suits for her, specifically for She-Hulk, they'll look a lot more natural. But he wants to make a super suit as well, and she's kind of like, I don't really want to do that. But he ends up convincing her, and he ends up making the suit. Cutting back to the Titania lawsuit, it turns out that She-Hulk remembers the fact that she was using the name She-Hulk on dating apps. So she has to end up reliving the embarrassment of going on all these dates by calling up all of these dates she's been on to testify in court, to side with her, saying hey, yeah, she did use the name She-Hulk. And especially the last guy that she went on a date with as She-Hulk only liked She-Hulk, and he explained that yeah, I liked her for She-Hulk, and I didn't really like her as Jen. So, it's pretty obvious that she was using the name beforehand. So She-Hulk wins the case. Titania has to take all of her products with the She-Hulk name off the market and rename them or something. And then the episode ends with a cut to Luke Jacobson's office, where he's got a yellow Daredevil helmet that's ready for pickup. So it's teasing the fact that Daredevil will appear later on in the series. There's also a shot during the credits sequence showing a bunch of shoes in Pug's Marvel shoe collection with tons of Easter eggs to already established Marvel heroes and villains in the MCU, along with some that may not be expected, and also ones that haven't been introduced. There's a couple X-Men and Fantastic Four references. There's a couple Spider-Man villains that are referenced, but they have their comic book look. So the Electro suit is green and yellow, just like the comic book look. And yeah, that's episode 5. I thought this one was pretty good, but not as good as the last one. Episode 6 is a wedding episode, and yes, they do address the fact that this is a filler episode, because this is a trope for a lot of shows in this style. The fourth wall break, addresses the fact that that's the case, to tease fans and make them more anticipated for what's to come, kind of just giving them a break from all the craziness and then leading up to something bigger. Jen gets invited to her friend's wedding, and she debates whether or not she wants to go as Jen or She-Hulk, because, being Jen would, not bring the attention away from the bride and groom, just be about, them and their day. Or she could be She-Hulk, and because, she loves the attention, she loves all the all the good vibes she gets from it. And, she's just a lot happier and she can be herself. And, no one really has a problem with that. They just love She-Hulk. So she ends up deciding to go to the wedding as She-Hulk. But then, of course, her friend, the bride, is not very happy with her because people are drawing attention away from, she's drawing attention away from the bride. Now She-Hulk's at this wedding party. People want to talk to She-Hulk. So, she gets mad, and then She-Hulk's like, all right, I'll transform back to Jen. Jen's coworkers decide to pick up a case for Mr. Immortal, who went through multiple marriages. And when he was over it, he would just kill himself to get a death certificate to make the marriage null and void and move on to the next one. It was a pretty crazy concept. Like, this guy literally just can't die. So, and it gets even crazier a little later on. There's tons of bickering and things like that. They're trying to understand, there's a bunch of wives that come in and they testify against him. And then he gets sick of all the commotion that he just runs and jumps out the window, falls onto a car. Pretty much, that would kill a normal person. But then his body just kind of morphs back into place. His bones kind of go back into place, and he just walks off like nothing happened. Like, it was one of the most bizarre things I've seen out of any of these things. But I was like, wow, that was they definitely went there. Cutting back to the wedding, Titania shows up and tries to fight Jen, and then they start fighting, and she realizes, Jen's not so strong, so Jen turns into She-Hulk, and then embarrasses Titania, and then all the attention goes to her. But in between all that, Jen runs into a guy named Josh who's at the wedding. And, he seems really nice and all that. And, they hit it off, and, they have all this sweet talk and all that. And this guy just seems really interested in Jen. And that's like all she's wanted, because all these people she's gone on dates with only care about She-Hulk. And, that's only one piece of the pie. If you're going to commit to that, you're going to have to accept all of it. So, of course, she's just excited about the fact that someone cares about Jen, which she hasn't really had. So they hit it off, and then the fight with Titania happens, and then the venue gets a little wrecked, and there's a bunch of punches to the ground, and the ground erupting and cracking forward and stuff like that. Stuff we see with Hulk content typically. And the bride is too drunk to even be mad at She-Hulk for ruining her wedding party. And yeah. That's pretty much it. Nothing really happens. Then we cut to a little computer monitor showing a video from another angle of Mr. Immortal jumping out of the building and then re-morphing back. It shows up on Intelligentsia, which is a website in the MCU. In the comics, it's actually the name of an evil group led by the leader, who was in 2008's Hulk movie and is also set to return in Captain America 4. But in this project, in this MCU show, it's a site kind of like, Reddit or 4chan, where there's like a bunch of boards and stuff and people, discussing things and coordinating events and things like that. And it's just a anti-She-Hulk train. They want to just get rid of She-Hulk, because it's like, it's kind of representing the whole misogynistic viewpoint that some fans have on these characters. So they're really just going ham with that. And then the scene cuts to a lab where some scientists are putting some stuff together as they are preparing some more needles so they can steal some blood from She-Hulk. They're thinking of some new elaborate plans behind the scenes, and we'll just have to wait and see what they have to offer. And then leading into episode 7, Jen starts to build her relationship with Josh. They end up going on some nice, cute dates, and it's all great and fun. And then they sleep together. But then the next morning, he's gone, and she doesn't know what happened. He's not answering the phone, and then a couple days go by. Turns out he ghosted her. There's a little funny moment where a clip from the Muppet movie plays where Miss Piggy is in the prison, and then she kind of rips open the jail cell in anger. It kind of represented what Jen was going through in her mind. I thought that was pretty great. She gets a call from Blonsky's parole officer, something wrong with his anklet, where a signal was going off, speculating he might have become the Abomination again when he wasn't supposed to. Come on, man. I hit the table and he's like knocking over, and now the whole table's shaking. Jesus Christ. So because of that possibility of him becoming the Abomination again, to keep the parole officer safe, she kind of, not really wanting to do it, but she ends up going to assist the parole officer in case anything bad happens. And then turns out nothing's wrong. Everything seems to be fine. He's not Abomination when they show up. And then She-Hulk's car gets destroyed by a couple of people that are staying at Blonsky's little residence he has going on, little retreat place or whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. There are a couple washed-up villains that, they want a second chance at life. They want to be either heroic or just live their lives out. And Blonsky's running a whole support group for them. So, he convinces her to stay since obviously her car's wrecked now. She can't get home. So he's like, hey, come and sit back for a while and, have a talk with us. Maybe we can help you with anything that you're dealing with. So they sit her down and, she's surrounded by a couple, misfit supervillains that I guess Marvel isn't looking to make full projects on, but figured, hey, for the sake of the fans, let's throw them in here for fun. And one of those members that she's sitting down with turns out to be a member of the Wrecking Crew, one of those 4 dudes that tried to assault her and steal blood from her in a previous episode. And they even pull the whole thing where she breaks the 4th wall and she's like, yeah, you probably didn't even remember who this guy was. And honestly, I didn't. She nailed it. It was perfect. They help her come to terms with the fact that Josh ghosted her. And, then she's like, yeah, you guys are right. Thank you. She ends up going home. And then we cut to a scene where it turns out that Josh seemingly ghosted her because he was actually just someone working for Intelligentsia. He basically slept with her and then, took a sample of her blood and then left her there pretty much naked in her bed. And that was it. Yeah, it turned out Josh wasn't the nice guy we thought he was, which was really unfortunate. For a second, I was like, oh, this is going to be really nice. But yeah, no. He's never seen again after that. As for episode 8, it is easily the best episode in the entire run of this. And let me just say this before I get into my thoughts on it. Keep in mind, I've not watched Daredevil or any of the Marvel Netflix shows that were out, like Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, The Punisher, The Defenders. I haven't seen any of those. I know they're on Disney Plus now. I just haven't gotten around to watching them yet. I've been meaning to, though, especially now since some of these characters are confirmed to be coming back or already have come back for Disney Plus projects and movies. I actually do plan on watching these within the next year, so that way I can make podcasts about them, and especially leading up to Daredevil Born Again and other projects that will include these characters. So post episode 50, I'm going to start working on doing some binge watching of not only these shows, but other shows as well, and that way I can give you guys my thoughts on them, similar to something like this. I know these shows have a lot of praise, and I'll just flat out say this right here. My only real connections with Daredevil, at least right now, are all of the MCU things he's appeared in, so She-Hulk, Spider-Man No Way Home, along with this Daredevil figure that my brother had as a kid that I held on to. So, that's all the connection I have with this character. I don't really know much about him other than that. Like I said, I have not watched the shows. I'm not a comic book reader, so yeah, that's your little FYI, I guess. The episode opens with Leapfrog, who was a character teased in the trailers. He tries to stop these 2 guys from stealing a TV and pretty much embarrasses himself, tries to, fly in the air, and then his suit malfunctions, and he wants to sue the designer, who actually turns out to be Luke Jacobson. So, unfortunately, She-Hulk has to go against her own designer because Leapfrog is going through GLK&H to sue, and she has no choice but to defend him, basically jeopardizing her chances of any future suits from Luke Jacobson in the process. They go to court, and it turns out that Luke's lawyer is none other than Matt Murdock himself. He shows up in the classic suit and the cane and all that with the glasses, and from what I've seen with like screenshots of the Daredevil show over the years, that this is like right in line with the show. And I think that's pretty cool. And the best part about this is that like the legal banter and the argument back and forth between She-Hulk and Daredevil is actually really convincing. It's actually really good. And, Daredevil makes a good case that, Leapfrog basically, he was told not to put jet fuel in the boots, but he did anyway, and the suit malfunctioned. And, that's not Luke Jacobson's fault. He misused the suit. So it's his own fault that he got injured. So he actually beats the case, and She-Hulk is just sitting there in embarrassment. Through this, we also find out that the Sokovia Accords have been repealed, meaning that people don't have to show the world who they really are, their real identities as a superhero. They can remain anonymous now again, which is pretty awesome. So it gives chances for people like Daredevil to remain anonymous, along with Spider-Man now that nobody knows his real identity. Later on, Matt Murdock and Jen Walters, they meet up in a bar, and they have this nice back and forth, and they actually have a really good chemistry, which I thought was awesome. She-Hulk then meets up with Todd, who wants to fight a legal case where Wakanda is requesting for him to return a Wakandan spear that he bought off the black market or something, or from a museum. But of course, Wakanda, being, preserving of, things that were stolen from them, they want it back. And he's like, he doesn't want to give it up because, he paid for it. And then he pulls the whole, like, I'm not racist, I have black friends thing, being like, oh, I love the Wakandan people, and then going like, Wakanda forever, and like doing all that bullshit. And She-Hulk literally says to him, that makes me uncomfortable. And I thought that was great. That was great delivery on her part. She leaves because obviously she's just not feeling that. And she ends up getting a call from Leapfrog, sounding like he's in danger, saying that he's been kidnapped. So, of course, she goes after and tries to figure out what's going on. She finally dons the super suit that we've been waiting to see. We've seen it in promotional material up until that point, and now she's donning it in the show. So, she goes to find out where Leapfrog is, and while she's on her way there, she gets ambushed by Daredevil, and then they have a fight. And let me just say, the choreography throughout this whole fight was amazing. And yeah, a bit of it's CGI, and apparently people were complaining about that. But like, let's be honest, She-Hulk is not like an actual person. There's no like 7-foot tall person they can have there as like as a stand-in. It's probably, from the behind the scenes we saw, it was just Jen Walters and then like a picture of She-Hulk that you're supposed to look at, and that they edited out in post or something. But obviously with a big choreographed fight scene like that, it's kind of impossible to do that, and it wouldn't work. So obviously they kind of had to do the whole CGI thing for a little bit. And honestly, I thought it was fine. I thought the fight was really great. It was well choreographed. They went at it for a little while, and then Jen, pulls the mask off, finds out that it is Matt Murdock, and she's all confused because she's like, oh, what do you, like, pretend to be blind? Because, like, that's actually problematic, and that got a bit of a chuckle out of me. It turned out that Leapfrog had actually kidnapped Luke Jacobson after he lost in court against him. So Daredevil fills that in to She-Hulk, and now that they're on the same side, they go after Leapfrog in this little hideout that he has. Daredevil also educates She-Hulk on the difference between a goon and a henchman, talking about how some of them just want the money, or some people that live to serve. Then we get a hallway fight that's in homage to the Netflix show. I've seen like one fight from that show, and it was like a long time ago, but I was kind of getting the same vibes from the one they had in She-Hulk. Luke forgives She-Hulk after being rescued. She's like, I'm so sorry. I promise, this won't happen again. And, all that jib jab yada yada. Daredevil and Jen then, sit on the rooftop and they have a conversation just about how, Daredevil thinks it's good, to have a secret identity, and that he tells Jen he wants to keep his identity secret, and she's completely understanding of that. And then she's like, "Oh, are you free?" And then he's like, "Yeah, I don't leave right away." And then they go back to Jen's house and they do the thing. They do the deed, which was something I was not expecting going in at all. Yeah, it definitely happened. I was like, "Oh wow, they're doing that." And I thought that was hilarious. Like, this show is really pushing the boundaries with what we've already understood about the MCU. Now that we're on Disney Plus, we can kind of do a bit more risque things, that maybe wouldn't fly as much in a movie theater, but we can pull it off in Disney Plus shows, and it's not really that big a deal. And I guess they're really testing the waters with that with She-Hulk in some pretty daring ways, no pun intended. And honestly, it's all great for Jen. She got a W. She hooked up with a guy that, was actually like a decent human being and not someone who was only interested in She-Hulk or only interested in Jen, or somebody that, was actually just using her to get something or get a blood sample from her or whatever the fuck. And it turned out to be really great. And the episode wasn't over, actually. They were leading into the fact that Jen was nominated for Female Lawyer of the Year at an awards show. And she ends up winning at this award show. They go and she's all dressed up and all that. She's ready to accept her award. And then the whole event gets hijacked by Intelligentsia. They start playing stuff on the screen, all this misogynistic stuff about She-Hulk, trying to frame her as a horrible person. And then they leak a sex tape that the guy who catfished and ghosted her, I already forgot his name. That's how much of a dickhead he was. He secretly recorded them having sex, and that was not good. And she was not very happy. So she went rage mode, which was something she had not done yet. And of course, in the eyes of the public, that's like scary. So the Department of Damage Control corner her, and the episode ends on a cliffhanger with her hands up. And that's episode 8. Leading into episode 9, the finale of this, first season, because honestly, let's face it, we're probably getting a season 2. The introduction is an homage to the original 1970s Hulk series, basically explaining the origin of She-Hulk in a very negative way, I guess, according to the public's view of She-Hulk now that she's gone rage mode in public. And it's alongside Bruce Banner, which I thought was like a little funny thing thrown in there, similar to old lawyer ads and things like that. I thought it was a nice little reference to things like that. She ends up waking up. We transition to present day. She wakes up in a cell at the Department of Damage Control. And of course, in order for her to be released, she has to promise to not transform into She-Hulk ever again. And as a result, she is now unemployed because, of course, the whole point of her having GLK&H as a job in the first place was because she was She-Hulk. She is now, of course, living back at home because now she can't afford to pay for her apartment. And her mission is now to figure out who is behind Intelligentsia and, how she can put a stop to all this and get her life back. She takes up Emil Blonsky's offer to stay at his little cottage getaway retreat place, and that's only because she gets overwhelmed with her mom showing Jill embarrassing videos of her from college and things like that, and just trying to get to the bottom of this and having all these distractions. She's like, I gotta get out of here. So she goes to Emil Blonsky's place, and then in the background, Jill and Pug go on an investigation. They go undercover to figure out what the hell's going on with Intelligentsia, because it turns out they're having this meeting where all the members of Intelligentsia are going to get together and announce this new plan to take down She-Hulk. So Pug goes in as a fake member of Intelligentsia, trying to figure out all the stuff that's going on. Pug then finds out that Todd is in fact the leader of intelligentsia. He is Hulk King, the guy that's been, hiring all these people to try and steal She-Hulk's blood and all this other stuff. And it turns out this whole meeting is on Emil Blonsky's property because he comes out of nowhere as a surprise guest for the event because he got paid to be there. It turns out that while he did transform into Abomination, his goal was to never be a part of this. He didn't want to be a villain. He was just hired, and that was all. So at first it's like, oh my God, like what's this guy doing here? Was he a villain the whole time? Was this whole thing a setup? Like you have all these questions going through your head, and then the show just goes absolutely bonkers. Todd injects himself with Hulk blood, basically turning himself into a Hulk, and then Titania bursts through. She shows up, starts causing mayhem, and then all of a sudden the Hulk comes out of nowhere, and he's like, "Get off my cousin, asshole," talking to Abomination. Then they start fighting, and then Jen's just looking at the screen. She's breaking the fourth wall. She's like, what the hell's going on? There's too much happening right now. Do you guys like really want this as your finale? And then she does the unthinkable. She's like, I'm going to put a fix to this. She jumps. We go all of a sudden, you think, oh, did my remote fuck up or something? No, she's literally on the Disney Plus Marvel section. Pops right out of the She-Hulk show. Climbs over a couple. Jumps into an episode of Assembled, which is a behind-the-scenes docuseries talking about all the different movies and shows that Marvel's been making. They put those out on Disney Plus after a movie or a show finishes up and gets dropped on the platform. So she hops in there, and she ends up going to Marvel Studios inside of an MCU show. This was absolutely the most mind-boggling thing that I have ever seen come out of one of these projects. It's so meta, and knowing that writers from Rick and Morty were involved in this show, it makes complete sense. Let's be honest here. She goes through the studio. She's looking to see, find a writer's room or something. And she actually finds the writer's room for She-Hulk. And she says, hey, this ending sucks. And all these shows have been like really predictable. They have these formulaic patterns. People are tired of seeing all this stuff. Why don't we do something different? And she requests to see Kevin. Of course, all of us were thinking, oh, Kevin Feige. So, she fights a bunch of these security guards in the style of like a action Marvel movie, Marvel scene. It's pretty great, actually. She ends up getting into Kevin's office, and it turns out that Kevin is this robot, and it stands for Knowledge Enhanced Visual Interconnected Nexus. And basically, it's this robot that puts all the stuff together. This whole formulaic thing they got going on. It's all put through algorithms, and then they figure out what people like, and they make that into something. It was basically Marvel making fun of themselves. And then she calling them out on a bunch of flaws with She-Hulk and things like that, how they're throwing a bunch of cameos in and stuff, and people are seeing this whole like fight break out, and they're like, yeah, people are going to be pissed off, they don't want to see this. And she was absolutely right. I would have been really disappointed if all that buildup was just Todd has Hulk powers and now they got to fight. That would have been so stupid. Let's be honest here. Do we really want that? I think this ending was way better. She then starts asking questions about, oh, when are the X-Men coming? So she's really just breaking the fourth wall now, really just speaking to the fans here. And then she asks where Hulk went. All of a sudden he just appears out of nowhere. Well, how come, where did he go? And then Kevin's like, oh, we're going to save that for the movie. And maybe that's a little hint for the future there. I guess we'll find out sooner or later. But there's a bit more teasing with that at the end of this. I'll talk about that in a second. And then just like that, she's like, hey, change this, turn Emil back into Emil. Don't make him Abomination. Get rid of Todd's Hulk powers. Get Hulk out of there. He doesn't need to be there. Get Titania out of there. It doesn't make any sense. And And then it just cuts to this like typical, wrap up scene that we've seen in a lot of Marvel projects where like, the bad guy gets arrested, the good guys, reunite and all that, or like, the hero confronts the bad guy or something like that as they're being taken away. Your typical end of movie tropes. And then, yeah, they basically address the fact that, yeah, it's kind of obvious, but, we didn't need this big action ending, it would have sucked. So we're just going to skip that and just get to the end, which I thought was pretty funny, actually. Todd gets arrested. Emil Blonsky gets arrested because, he wasn't supposed to turn back into Abomination. And even though he wasn't doing bad things, he specifically was not allowed to be Abomination, but he broke that, so he's got to go back to prison. And then, you got the end scene where She-Hulk's family, she's got them all outside having a nice barbecue. Matt Murdock is there. I guess they're boyfriend and girlfriend now, which is pretty cool. And then Smart Hulk comes back. He's like, "Hey guys, I just got back from Sakaar. I'd like to introduce you to someone." And it turns out it's his son. It's Scar. And as someone who has not read the comics, I am not familiar with Hulk's bloodline. But yeah, he's got a son in an arc of the comics called World War Hulk. And I guess that's what they're teasing. Something that's going to happen sooner or later in the future. So guess we'll have to see what goes on with that. She-Hulk gets her job back, and she announces she's going to be a lawyer and a superhero. And the post-credit scene has Wong breaking Emil Blonsky out of prison again, bringing him, I guess, to Kamar-Taj, where he stays. And that's episode 9 of She-Hulk. As for my thoughts on the show overall, to end things, the meta with this show and the fourth wall breaks are amazing, especially since we haven't really seen that in this universe. All the appearances from Wong, Abomination, Daredevil, and the Hulk were great. I really love them. I can't wait to see what the future holds with a lot of these characters. In regards to Hulk-related characters, this wasn't the case when this show initially ended, but we have learned this since, that Harrison Ford is joining the MCU as a recast for Thunderbolt Ross. He's going to be in both Captain America New World Order and the Thunderbolts, so he might possibly be the Red Hulk in those movies. Not only that, but the leader who was teased in 2008's Hulk is going to be the villain of Captain America New World Order, so it might be possible that those two movies are going to set up a lot of future stuff with the Hulk. Whether that leads to World War Hulk or other things in relation to the character, we'll just have to wait and see. But I'm really excited to see what they do with that. Of course, we have Daredevil getting his own 18-episode first season of a new MCU show, Daredevil Born Again, in 2024. Not to mention, of course, She-Hulk herself. I don't know where exactly she could appear again, maybe in Captain America New World Order or the Thunderbolts. But if anything, she'll most likely be in Kang Dynasty and or Secret Wars. So yeah, while not every episode was a banger, I really appreciated the show for what it was trying to accomplish, and I think it succeeds in what they were trying to do. I'm anticipating a second season. I hope it's great, and I'm sure it will be, considering they've pretty much laid the groundwork. Now they can just do whatever they want with the character now that they've fleshed her out. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what the future of this character has in store for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Okay, that was a very long discussion about She-Hulk, considering I talked about the entirety of the 9 episodes. The raw recording right now is at 1 hour and 16 minutes, so I probably cut out a lot of pauses and mix-ups of words, but now we're going to get into the new Halloween special from Marvel. It's called Werewolf by Night. It is the first Marvel Studios special presentation. The second one is going to be the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special that's coming out later this month on the 25th. It follows a group of monster slayers as they fight for the power from a deceased monster slayer, a bloodstone, which is attached to a monster that they're trying to get it from. Jack Russell is the main character in this project. He's played by Gael Garcia Bernal, and his duty is to survive the night as well as take care of other matters in relation to what's going on. Laura Donnelly plays Elsa Bloodstone, who is the daughter of the family of the deceased, but she left the family, I guess, in retaliation or being against their values, and she just wants to take the Bloodstone away from them so they don't have this ridiculous power. This special is entirely in black and white, which is something that Marvel hasn't done, and I thought was pretty interesting for a concept. Not to mention it's directed by Michael Giacchino, who of course is known for doing lots of composing for a bunch of Pixar movies like The Incredibles and Up and Coco and Ratatouille, but also plenty of other movies over time. Most recently, he composed The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson, directed by Matt Reeves. And he was also the composer for the MCU Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. So he composed the score for Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home, and Spider-Man No Way Home. So with the fact that he's not only composing the music for this special, but also directing the entire project, he doesn't have to worry about coordinating stuff with another guy in regards to the score because he's doing it all himself. And it works so well. This special is fantastic. It has tons of homages to, you know, the idea of like the 1930s and 40s monster movies like Frankenstein that we saw. I mean, I haven't seen them personally, but, you know, I guess people have seen them. You know, they can probably, you know, think of this as a callback to those. I will watch those at some point. All the visuals, the cinematography, the choreography, sound design, the little cigarette burns that pop up every now and then on the screen, really emulating the idea that this is like a 1930s or 40s movie or something. I think that's pretty great. Also, some surprisingly graphic violence in this compared to a lot of other projects. Maybe it was because of the fact that it's in black and white. They can get away with more blood and things like that because I guess the redness of blood is a bit too triggering for like a PG-13 movie or something like that. So I guess they were able to do a bit more with that, which I think is pretty interesting. Turns out Man-Thing is the monster that everyone's looking for because he has the Bloodstone stuck on his back. So Jack and Elsa team up. They end up working together to rescue Man-Thing and retrieving this Bloodstone. You know, they have a common goal. You know, Elsa wants the Bloodstone and Jack just wants to save his friend. So they work together in order to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. Turns out Man-Thing's name is Ted, which I thought was pretty funny. Apparently this has gotten a laugh out of a lot of people, and I don't blame them. It's a pretty funny moment. And after freeing Ted, they retrieve the Bloodstone, but Jack gets pushed back by it because apparently, you know, he's not what he seems. He's not human, I guess. And then it turns out he is a werewolf, of course, by the title of the project. You know, it's called Werewolf by Night. Yeah, he's probably a werewolf. Right before this, however, he ends up sniffing Elsa so that he remembers what she smells like and that he doesn't kill her by accident. And then once he ends up becoming the werewolf, he breaks out of the cell and wreaks absolute havoc on the Bloodstone family, killing all of them. Man-Thing comes and saves the day. You know, he ends up killing off the rest of the family, you know, because one of them had survived a little longer than expected and tried to end Jack's life, but Man-Thing saved him in the process. And then it ends by them going their separate ways. You know, Elsa has the Bloodstone now, and now Jack and Ted can go off and enjoy their lives now that Ted is freed. And then the sun comes up, it transitions into color, which I thought was really cool. And they just have a nice, wholesome moment. And I just thought it was great overall. So yeah, it ends there. It's like a nice, nearly an hour-long TV special. And honestly, with something like this, I'm really curious to see what Marvel has in store next. I don't really know what else they could do outside of the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. I know they're already working on. There have been reports of other things that were maybe initially planned to be these 6 to 9 episode shows, but now they're going to be these 1 hour things instead. That way they're not stretched out to oblivion or something like that. So I've heard talks, there's going to be one on Nova. They're planning on doing one for the Silver Surfer right before the Fantastic Four movie comes out. Who knows what'll happen? There's tons of speculation in all sorts of places. Only time will tell, of course. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Werewolf by Night. I really enjoyed it. I think it's one of the most unique Marvel projects to come out ever, and I'm really excited to see what they do next. And I hope Michael Giacchino gets more directorial opportunities. This was his first directorial credit, and he did a fantastic job. I hope this isn't the end for him. I hope he gets more opportunities in the future. And yeah, with that said, that's going to wrap it up for my thoughts on She-Hulk and Werewolf by Night. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Stay tuned for episode 49, where I'll be discussing my thoughts on Black Panther Wakanda Forever right when it comes out. I'll be giving my spoiler thoughts on the film. And episode 50, featuring a good friend of mine. So I hope you guys are excited. Be sure to follow the podcast on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Also, like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the YouTube channel by going to youtube.com/Jimmy Mullen Podcast. With that said, thank you guys so much. Audio platforms as well, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor. And yeah, thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy. Peace.